Hi, I am GordonSingh, and today we will be exploring organizational theories, evaluating current research trends, and identifying areas for continued study. It is my hope that by the end of the presentation, we will discuss social learning theory. We will examine recent research about or incorporate in social learning theory. We will discuss specific areas within organizational behavior that requires future research, and we will analyze three articles related to organizational behavior. So one of the things I found when doing the discussion question this week, specifically the one related to the use of artificial intelligence to refine or research topic, I found that for my area of interest, which is health literacy among nursing students, um, social learning theory was one of those theories that came about in my reading. And so I decided to choose social learning theory as the focus of my assignment this week. So, the social learning theory is a psychological model that explains how people learn new behaviors, attitudes, and knowledge by observing and imitating others. And I find it's a very applicable um, theory, especially in the field of healthcare, which I am in. The key components of social learning theory are observation, modeling, imitation, and reinforcement. Observation speaks to learning that occurs through observing others' behaviors and attitude, while modeling speaks about how observing others influences behavior. Imitation speaks to the learners imitating observed behavior, and reinforcement speaks to the rewards or punishments, how they influence behavior adoption. Now, the social learning theory that was originally proposed by Albert Bandura is very applicable in today's society, especially in the field of education, for training programs, for behavioral intervention, and for social marketing. The social learning theory is really very applicable, and it highlights the importance of how social influences learning and behavior. So current trends in social learning um, really focuses on designing spaces that fosters active and social learning strategies. So this includes active learning spaces, human-centered designs, technology, and how it influences learning. So as it relates to active learning spaces, there really is a thrust to seeing how classroom and informal spaces are being redesigned to encourage learner participation, interaction, and social engagement. The flexibility to facilitate learning, um, to create a collaborative workspace that supports student-centered learning is one of the trends that I noticed when I was doing my research on the social learning theory. As it relates to the human-centered design, it speaks to learning spaces prioritizing the human factor. So there's a shift from information commons to learning commons that would reflect what focus is provided in an integrated supportive space for individual and group work. And as you can imagine, as we really embrace globalization and the advancement in technology, there is a trend towards research that speaks to how to leverage technology to enhance learning. So software implementation, interoperability, and mobile-friendly designs that facilitates learning is really being assessed, researched, and discussed at this time. So as it relates to what is being debated about and the gaps in social learning research, there is a there is discussion about social learning analytics, in which there's a need for more research on analyzing social learning processes in computer supported collaborative learning environments to really identify effective strategies to improve the student's outcome. Institutions are really struggling to keep a pace with the rapid technological advancement, making it really challenging to design learning spaces that effectively integrate technology. So there is a debate about technological integration within the learning environment. And there's also a debate about the need for measuring learning effectiveness. So, more research is needed to really understand how social learning spaces impact students' learning outcomes and to develop effective assessment strategies so that we can really analyze if learning is indeed taking place and if it is taking place, how effective it is. So some potential areas for future research and development includes virtual and blended learning environments. We need to explore the role of technology in facilitating social learning across different contexts and environments because advancement in technology is really the reality of our classrooms now. So there needs to be future research that explains and explore how technology is facilitating social learning. Personalized learning is another area that a gap exists and there's a need for research. There's a need to develop strategies to support diverse learning styles so that we can inform the general populace as to the best way to engage in personalized learning. So there's need for further research in this area. And also, we need to be looking on faculty development. Educators too needs to be trained. Of course, educators are of a different generation and they may not be au fait with the technological advancement. And so they need to be supported, and we need to research and see how to support persons during this transition of providing educators with the technological know-how to keep abreast with their students in the various social learning experiences. So we can say that the social learning theory is very relevant and applicable in today's society. In organizational settings, social learning theory, therefore, is very applicable in various ways, as it could be used to assist with training and development, with um, onboarding new persons, employees, mentoring, leadership development. We would want to utilize the tenets or the principles of the social learning theory in order to ensure that team members are smoothly integrated into the organization. For performance management, giving feedback and reinforcements, role modeling by the leaders demonstrate what the organization requires, what their values and expectations are. And for organizational culture, um, we can socialize new employees to learn what the organizational norms and values are through observation and interaction, which facilitates um, the whole process of integrating and adapting to new environments. So it's very beneficial to apply the social learning and very applicable social learning theory as it improves your job performances, it enhances leadership development, it creates a stronger organizational culture, and it facilitates increased employee engagement. Let's discuss the areas within organizational behaviors that for further research. So there are a number of areas within the organizational behavior purview that requires further research. Leadership and management is one. Employees' motivation and performance is another area. Team dynamics and group behaviors, workplace diversity and inclusion, and employee well-being and work-life balance are really very topical issues within organizational behavior. Certainly, for leadership and management, the impact of remote leadership or the adaptive leadership or cross-cultural leadership is very topical and relevant and really needs to be really explored as it relates to employees' motivation and performance. There's a need to explore the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation to really understand the role of intrinsic and extrinsic motivators in employees' performance. Motivational strategies for remote employees. Remote work is a reality of our society today. And it's really difficult for some persons to really be motivated to work from remote locations. So we need to really research how develop effective motivation strategies for remote worker. We need to also explore the impact of workplace environment. We need to examine the relationship between workplace environment and the employee's motivation. So that's another avenue that requires further research. As it relates to organizational culture and changes, we want to see how culture aligns with mergers and acquisition, or how do we manage cultural changes within organization. And we need to really explore the impact of organizational culture on employees' retention. Team dynamics is always a very topical issue in organizational behavior. So, with this thrust to remote working, we need to explore the impact of virtual team dynamics. We need to understand the differences between virtual versus traditional teams and how virtual team dynamics enhances or retracts the effectiveness of employees. We need to look on the diversity and team performance. We need to investigate the impact of diversity on team performance and collaboration. And look on conflict resolution because as humans, conflict is inevitable. And so we need to develop effective conflict resolution strategies, especially in this age of technology when we are in virtual settings. Employees' well-being and work-life balance. Certainly, after COVID, that has been a very topical issue because remote work and employees' well-being, there needs to be an investigation on how to effectively do remote work and maintain employees' well-being. I can there I can give cite the example of during the COVID time. Personally, I felt that with the use of technology to get work done, there was no boundaries. You were accessible 24 hours with remote working, and there needs to be a research that informs how we create organization that creates work-life balances. What strategies can we develop to ensure that the workplace is not a stressful place for or workers? So to find the areas for discussion, for organizational behavior research, a number of articles came up, and I got the themes from those articles, but I wanted to highlight three articles and do a quick analysis of these articles. So the first study that I want to discuss is the The study entitled The Perceived Risk of Job Instability and Unethical Organizational Behavior Amid the COVID-19 Pandemic, the role of family financial pressure and distributive injustice in the tourism industry. So this article um, highlights the mediating roles of family financial pressure and distributive injustice in this relationship. It was a quantitative study that did a questionnaires among 830 employees from hotels and travel agencies using the structural equation modeling to do the analysis of data. What the article highlighted was that the pandemic caused significant economic disruptions and it led to job instability, which heightened the stress and anxiety among employees. And this instability was linked to increased unethical behaviors aimed at benefiting the organization, such as withholding negative information or exaggerating product benefits. It also showed that there are mediating factors like family financial pressures. So the employees were facing financial strains, were more likely to engage in unethical practices to alleviate their stress and secure financial benefits. And there was distributive injustice, where there is perceived unethical treatment in the workplace that further exacerbated unethical behaviors as employees sought to protect their position and resources. So, a strength of the research was that it was timely and relevant. So, it addressed the whole global crisis of COVID-19 and it offered valuable insight into its psychological and behavioral impacts on employees. And the methodology, a quantitative study, was a comprehensive methodology where the sample size of 830 employees was was adequate representation of the sector, and the use of structural equation modeling to do the analysis ensure that there was robust statistical analysis, and therefore we can say the findings are reliable, including the mediating factors, added depth to the analysis, and highlighted the complex interplay of personal and organizational factors. However, the study was very context specific, and so it's very hard to generalize the findings because it's so focused on the Egypt's tourism sector. So it cannot be the conclusion that we're drawn cannot be generalized to other industries or regions. The fact that it was self-reported data, so the questions or the survey that was done were done, the information was given by the individual. So it's a self-reported survey. And the fact that it was a self-reported survey could introduce bias into the results. And the introduction of bias, of course, is going to affect the overall objectivity of the results. And there was limited exploration of possible solutions. So while the study identified the key issues, it did not give actionable recommendations for mitigating unethical behaviors. So the next study that was looked on, that we're analyzing, is is a study on how level 5 leadership escalates organizational citizenship behaviors in telecom sectors of Pakistan, exploring mediatory role of organization dissent. So this study um, was a quantitative study and it analyzed data from 450 managerial level employees across four major telecom companies in Pakistan. And it utilizes the partial least square structural equation modeling to test the hypotheses that were developed. And what this study found was that there is a direct relationship between the level 5 leadership and organizational citizenship behavior. So, leaders with humility and professional will inspired employees to go beyond their formal job role. It also found that organizational dissent, um, when the leaders value organized dissent, it fosters a culture of trust and innovation and enhances the employees' discretionary efforts. And the study focused really on the telecom sector. So it gave us a perspective of the economic importance and the role of leadership in managing employees' behavior effectively. So a strength of this study was that it had a very innovative focus. So the study bridges the gap in the existing literature by examining the level 5 leadership and its impact on organizational citizenship behavior at an individual level, with organizational dissent being a mediator. The quantitative approach with the use of the partial least square structural equation modeling ensured the ability of the researcher to do a robust statistical analysis, which enhanced the reliability of the findings. Additionally, it was very sector specific. So the study focused on the telecom sector, which gave it valuable context specific insights about the industry. However, this is an limitation of the study. The fact that it is so focused on the telecom sector that it cannot be applicable to other, it reduces the applicability rather of the findings to other organizational setting or industry. It has a very narrow scope. So it would have been beneficial if it could have had a broader examination of leadership styles and organizational behavior. And again, this too was a self-reported means of data collection, which means that the answers are at risk or they are vulnerable to bias being introduced into the study, which minimizes the objectivity of the results gathered. The final study for that was analyzed, I chose because it's a part of the field of nursing. So this was a qualitative study of negative workplace behavior in nursing, and it explored the workplace dynamics of Australian nurses in a regional acute care hospital. It spoke to their experiences and perceptions of negative workplace behavior using the social work theory as a framework. So, in this study, there were core categories and subcategories of findings. So, the study identified at its core that a conflicted tribe under pressure was a central theme or challenge that the nurses face in their social and professional environment. Subcategories that were identified were that the nurse feels like they belong to a tribe. So there's a heightened sense of community among nurses. However, they describe the work environment to be a living hell, where they think it is very stressful and toxic. They think the policies are very ineffective, and There's a tension between professional responsibility and personal well-being, and it suggests that there's a need for cultural change to improve the workplace interaction. So, what I really liked about this study was the fact that it was qualitative. So, we know that qualitative study gives us rich data. They give us rich, insightful information. And the use of semi-structured interviews for nurses offered that for this study. It gave us an understanding of the workplace and the dynamics and the behaviors within the work environment. The fact that it was guided by the social work theory provides a robust lens through which the researcher could examine the social and organizational constraints influencing nurses' experiences. And the fact that the researcher could identify core categories and subcategories after interacting with the individuals is a strength, I believe, for this study. However, there were some um, drawbacks as it relates to how we how we interpret and utilize the information that was gained. So, of course, this study only interviewed 13 nurses to get to the point of data saturation. And the small number of participants limits the ability to really generalize the findings. And that's one of the shortcomings of qualitative studies. The information may be transferable to a similar context, but we cannot really look on nurses on a whole and generalize the findings that were there. The information is very context specific. So what happens in that setting may not be what is happening in other nursing setting. And the study would have benefited from getting the patient's perspective of organization or workplace behaviors. So this could have provided additional insight for the consumer of the research. So I thought these three articles were good examples of the shortcomings that are there in literature, in the methodology that requires of individuals for further research to really cement or concept on all those areas, those themes that were identified as areas for further research with organizational behavior. So with that, I would like to show you my references. Thank you. Have a wonderful night.